Welcome back. This is day 3 of your circulatory system. So today's aim is how do body systems work together to maintain a relatively stable internal environment? That sounds pretty familiar. In fact, I might even say that that is homeostasis. So I told you guys this word will come up a lot in living environment. Here it is yet again. We need to know that when we see a stable internal environment, we're talking about homeostasis. In this unit, we're going to be talking about how different body systems work together to maintain homeostasis. But today, we're specifically talking about the circulatory system and how it maintains homeostasis, which leads us into our do now. You guys have got one question. Go ahead and pause this video and answer it and press play when you're ready to review it. So, number 1, which statement best describes arteries? Is it A, they have thick walls and transport blood away from the heart? B, they have thick walls and transport blood toward the heart? C, they have thin walls and transport blood away from the heart. Or D, they have thin walls and transport blood toward the heart. Well, remember, whenever we see the word arteries, I want you guys to think of the phrase A for away, meaning they take blood away from the heart. So that tells us we can automatically eliminate 2 of these answer choices. We can cross out B and D because they both say that arteries carry blood toward the heart. Right, so that leads us to just answer choices A and C. We know that arteries take blood away from the heart, but now we have to figure out, do they have thick or thin walls? Well, if you think back to that picture that we saw of arteries yesterday, 2 days ago, I don't know what day it is, we saw that those arteries actually have really thick muscular walls. They looked something like this. And all of this wall is made up of muscles. And that is because they have to physically push that blood throughout the body. They have to give it a lot of force and exertion to push that blood away from the heart. That means that the answer here is A. They have those thick walls that transport blood away from the heart. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about these thick walls and what other purpose they serve. All right, that takes us to part A, our blood vessels reading. So as I go through this passage, I want you guys to highlight or annotate anything you think is important on your paper, and then use that information to answer questions 1 through 5 on your own. So again, when you're done with this passage, press pause on the video, answer your questions, and then press play to review them with me. All right, let's get to it. The circulatory system accomplishes the vital task of transport of blood through the many thousands of kilometers of blood vessels in the body. Blood from the lung enters the left atrium of the heart and then passes to the left ventricle. This oxygenated blood then begins its journey throughout the body by passing through the aorta of the heart, which is the body's largest artery, to the other arteries. The arteries are vessels that have thick muscular walls. They are very elastic, expanding and contracting as blood from the heart is pumped through them in pulses, 1 pulse for every heartbeat. The elasticity of the arteries' walls exerts pressure against the blood inside. We've got a rogue line there. This pressure that's exerted through your artery is measured as your blood pressure. Eventually, the blood from the arteries enters the capillaries, the smallest vessels within the circulatory system. Capillaries are, I lost my line. Capillaries are close to every body cell. It is at the capillaries that the exchange of nutrients and gases between the blood and the cells take place. After moving through the capillaries, blood returns through the thin-walled veins, which get larger and larger closer to the heart. Unlike the walls of the arteries, the walls of the veins have very little elasticity and are under low blood pressure. To prevent the blood from moving backwards, one-way valves work to ensure the deoxygenated blood travels back towards the heart. All right, so using that information, I now want you guys to pause this video and answer questions 1 through 5. Okay, then press play to review them with me. Number 1, rank the blood vessels from largest to smallest. That's the highlighter. Right, so we have 3 different types of blood vessels that we've talked about. We've got arteries, we've got veins, and we've got capillaries. So if you look at this picture, actually, you can tell which one is the largest based on the size of these muscles that are contained within each one. And we see here over here on the right that the arteries are actually going to be the thickest blood vessel. Right? They've got those thick muscular walls, which means that they are going to be the largest. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and write down arteries as our largest. And we can also see that capillaries here are going to be the smallest. In fact, we see that this layer that surrounds, or the layer of this capillary, is actually super, super thin. In fact, it has to be small enough for oxygen and carbon dioxide to diffuse across that membrane. Remember, we've talked about gas exchange happening in the capillaries. So they have to have a super thin layer, which means that they are going to be the smallest. Right? Which means that our veins are going to be somewhere in the middle. Now, sometimes you'll see the veins displayed like this. Other times you will see them displayed as kind of a weird shape like that. Both represent veins. Whenever it's drawn like this, that's just to signal that they contain those valves that prevent the blood from flowing backwards. But regardless, you can see here as well, they do have pretty thin walls, which means that they are going to be our middle tier of blood vessel. So arteries are the largest, veins are the middle, and then capillaries are going to be the smallest. Number 2, identify the major structures of the circulatory system. So we just went over 3, right? Those are the blood vessels that make up the circulatory system. So blood vessels like arteries, veins, and capillaries. But we also have a pretty big structure that we talked about yesterday. It sits in the middle of your chest and pumps blood throughout your body. That is going to be your heart. The heart is a huge component of your circulatory system. All right, so the blood vessels, arteries, veins, and capillaries, as well as your heart. Number 3, nutrients and gases are exchanged between the cells and the blood across the what? So when we're talking about nutrients and gases, we're talking about something called gas exchange. Remember, that's where oxygen is delivered and CO2 is picked up. That is going to be done in the capillaries. That's where gas exchange occurs. Remember that it has to be small enough for those materials to diffuse across the membrane. So oxygen goes into the cells, CO2 is taken out of the cells and returned back through those veins. Okay. Number 4, how does the blood pressure in the arteries compare to the blood pressure in the veins? So when we're talking about blood pressure, I'll go back up to our passage right here. We're told that blood pressure is a measure of the pressure that's exerted on your artery. So basically, the blood, every time it pumps throughout your body, that's going to create a pulse. And how hard that blood is being pushed through that artery is measured as your blood pressure. Okay? So blood pressure is going to be super, super high in your arteries because that is where blood is being physically pushed and physically pumped. The pressure is super high there. But we also need to know that the blood pressure is not quite as high in your veins. So we know that veins are pretty thin-walled, and because of that, the pressure isn't going to be very high because if the blood pressure was high in your veins, those walls are so thin that your veins could burst. So the blood pressure is not going to be super strong in your veins. It's actually going to be pretty low. Right? So the blood pressure is much higher in your arteries compared to the blood pressure in your veins. And number 5, why can you feel a pulse in your wrist every time your heart beats? Well, for this, we have to figure out what exactly is a pulse. And we need to know that a pulse is actually every single time your heart is pushing blood through your body. So if you feel your pulse right now, you can feel it beating. Go ahead and feel it on your wrist. You can feel that pat, right? And that's actually the valves in your heart opening and closing as they push blood through your body. So why can you feel a pulse in your wrist every single time your heart beats? Well, you're feeling your heart push that blood through your body. So the pulse is the opening and closing of those valves, again, that pushes blood through your body. All right, so again, I think it's said in the passage that 1 pulse equals every heartbeat, right? So every time you feel your pulse, that is your heart physically beating, pushing blood through your body. Way to go, heart, keeping us alive, 1 pulse at a time. Now, using that information, guys, go ahead and answer the questions on your exit ticket and submit that before tomorrow morning at 8:30. If you have any questions about this lesson, please send me a message on Remind and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Other than that, have a wonderful day and I'll see you guys tomorrow.